Welcome to The Point of View. This is your favorite current affairs show on television. Here on The Point of View on City TV, we get the right guests. We ask them relevant questions on issues that matter to you. We're live and interactive, and I'm looking forward to tonight's show. We are the first to talk about a book that will be launched in about 2 weeks. It's a book on General I.K Acheampong. Some say he's the unsung hero when it comes to Ghana's military involvement in politics. We'll be discussing his life and times in the context of where we are as a development state. You can send your questions and comments. I'll tell you where you can get the book. You will enjoy it. My guest is an erudite academic who's running the Kufuor Foundation but has time to do this intellectual work. We'll be right back with more. Stay with us. Welcome. So tonight we're discussing the life and times of General Ignatius Kutu Acheampong, a book written by Professor Bafo Agyeman-Duah, who is a co-founder of the CDD, worked for many years with the United Nations, particularly between 2005 and 2014, has been UNDP resident rep in a number of countries, and also helps out with the Kufuor Foundation and finds time to do stuff like this. We'll be walking through this book to discuss who Acheampong was, how he got involved in politics, what were his good sides, was Operation Feed Yourself the only thing he did? Is it true that he was dishing out golf cars to women and all of those things? And how tragic his end was, and have we given him the right place in Ghana's political history? Prof, good evening. Thanks for joining us.
Good evening, and thanks for having me.
How are you doing?
Pretty good. I'm fine.
Wow. So I don't know how you find time to do this, because you have a full-time job and you do other things.
That's correct.
And this is about 240 pages.
Correct.
So how do you find time to do this whilst you do all the other things?
Very good question. In fact, most of my books, this is my fifth book, by the way, I've written them whilst working full-time. I did my autobiography when I worked with the United Nations. I spend evenings and weekends on projects such as this. And this one you are holding took me 5 years.
Wow.
Because it wasn't a fully dedicated time.
5 years?
5 years. Because the research was very extensive.
Amazing.
A lot of face-to-face interviews with relevant individuals, archival research, a lot. So that, and I took my time to cross-check and all. So I wanted to make sure this is a very objective presentation.
It's very thorough.
Thank you.
Let me warn you, when you take it, you can't put it down, because you know we journalists, we have to concern people. So once we pick a book and we start seeing names and things, we don't want to put it down. But as a political science professor, I get the sense you are very interested in military involvement in politics. Is that your main area?
Actually, that was the focus of my graduate studies. My PhD was in security military studies in the United States. I looked specifically at the United States military developments and its relationship with Africa, taking Ethiopia as an example. Oh,
wow. With what is going on there right now?
Well, that was previously the relations between the U.S. and Ethiopia when Haile Selassie was in power from 1953 to 1976 or so. That's the period I studied. So I've been much interested in military issues.
Then I'm sure when there's a coup, your phone rings. Somebody will call you, oh, Prof, another coup.
Well, you know, these days I guess I'm getting a little bit...
You are used to it?
Yes.
But are you, I will come to the book, but are you concerned about West Africa? I think since August last year, there have been 2 coups in Mali, there's been an attempt in Niger, and then there's Guinea. Correct. If we take Idris Deby in Chad and it's there, you could say, how concerned are you about the sub-region and the sort of reversal of democratic gains?
I'm very much concerned because, you see, the decade of the 70s and 80s were terrible decades for Africa. And you may recall that the decade of the 80s was written off generally by the world as Africa's wasted decade, if you recall. Because these 2 decades were the period where Africa was ruled predominantly by military regimes. Out of the 51 countries, at the time, there were about almost 36, 40 that were ruled by military regimes. And Africa's development simply slacked, So I don't want to go back to that era again. So I think this emerging coups in West Africa in particular should be of greater concern to all of us. We don't want to go back to that era.
But it seems as if it's not just the military who are the problem, because I was talking to Ambassador I.K Acheampong yesterday, and we're just profiling from Nigeria to Benin to Togo, Burkina Faso.
Yeah.
We did Sahel, got all the way to Senegal. And some of it are Democrats who are becoming despots, or people who were elected. So the problem is not even just soldiers. It's more, I mean, look at Cameroon's leader. It's more the failure of the system to produce leaders who are giving off their best, and that's what's leading to the problem, is it not?
You said it right. It's a problem of leadership, to put it bluntly. Because oftentimes we get disappointed when people we regard as potentially good leaders, they come into power and their behavior simply is contrary to our expectations. I think that the problem should be traced to the kind of political structures or systems that we have created or adapted. Democracy, you see, is very funny. If you look at the Soviet world, now Russia, remember when the Western nations, Russia felt like it was a little bit weak, and the Western nations were insisting that there should be elections in Russia. You know what happened there? They did their own democratic elections. The prime minister was there after 2 terms of Putin. He stepped down, became a prime minister, and Putin...
Medvedev.
Exactly, became the president. After 1 term, he stepped back again, and Putin came, and now he's not going back. You see, that is just a small illustration of how, when countries are pushed to be democratic, how they behave. In Africa, I'm not saying that we have been pushed to have democratic countries. No, that's not what I'm saying. Because if you look at democracy, it has 2 sides. The valued aspects of democracy, what we call the principled democracy, and the practice aspect, which is where you create institutions and systems and structures to actualize the values that we all treasure. So the values of freedom, rule of law, equality, all these are universal. But when it comes to practicing it, we are not obliged to copy the Americans or the British or the Germans. That's why I think Africa, we've shortchanged ourselves by not thinking deep to create institutions and systems that actually respond to the values, but at the same time, that will be emerging from our culture and our history. That has been, for me, the greatest challenge.
Wow.
So as much as I have been a supporter of democratic movements on the continent, as I talk to you, I'm really seriously revising my notes.
So you don't think we should just superimpose, say, a Westminster system?
Thank you.
Copy their constitution?
Thank you.
Go to Parliament and argue?
That
we should look at the way we do things here and create something that fits us.
So far as we maintain the values, the emphasis should be the values, the principles of democracy. If you can create systems and institutions that actualize the values in your own way, there's nothing wrong. You see, I like telling people, what's about choosing to have 4-year tenure as president? Is it magical? Because some other democratic countries like France used to have 7 years tenure. In the United Kingdom, there's no limitation at all. A prime minister can be elected as many times as the people want him or her to be in office. So all these are variations. So there's no reason for us, for instance, to impose on ourselves this rigidity of a 4-year tenure if we think that doesn't suit our circumstance. But we need to think hard to come up with institutions and systems that will not undermine the values that we have to uphold.
Final question on this. What makes Ghana different? Again, we're talking to Ambassador, and apart from Cape Verde and Ghana in West Africa, almost every country has a question mark on its head in the past year. Is it that we are better people? Are our leaders more conciliatory? Is it that, why has we've never experienced a civil war? We've managed to change governments regularly. Yeah. In South, sitting presidents have lost elections.
Exactly.
So what makes us different?
It's a very tough question, because once you bring in the difference, then you are creating a new category of Africans. But I don't think we're different from the other Africans. Just that the way our culture has been managed, and the way the various groupings forming the new nation of Ghana, how we have related. And if you look at the historical linkages amongst these groups, it tells you something. See, chieftaincy may be different from the Ashanti to the north and all, but at the bottom line, it's all about the same. And they do understand and talk to each other. Okay? Now, when you come to national politics, again, we have to go back to our history. We started education long ago, even though it's Western education and have problems with it, the way it has made us westernized. All the same, if you go back to the Kesley Hayfalls and the Aborigines' right protection, on and on to the 40s, and the J.B. Danquas and Kufuor's, the Edwards, and all the others who emerged at the time, it tells you that education started on a very strong footing in the country. And somehow, despite its negatives, especially its westernization kind of aspect, we have succeeded in kind of giving ourselves a certain orientation that helps us to look at things differently. Also, mind you, all the countries that you mentioned experiencing recent hiccups in their democracies, they are mostly Anglophone countries. And if you look at the history of the French colonization and the British colonization, there's a vast difference. The French colonized to make the African become French, the so-called assimilation policy. Whereas with the British, it was indirect rule, more or less. They didn't want you to become British as such, so they used the chiefs and other means to impose their rule and all. And that helped us a lot. You see, Ghanaians, we have a certain pride. And I think Nkrumah contributed to that also, when he came up with the notion of African personality and all, being the first to gain independence, being the first in this. All those kinds of things have really shaped the Ghanaian thinking to make us look ourselves as somehow different. So if these people are fighting, we say, look, we don't. And somehow we develop the dynamics to manage our conflicts.
Some people fear that we could be reversing the political rhetoric. I'm sure you heard Mr. Mahama today and some of the things we've done. Some people think that if we get complacent, we could, what happens in other countries could happen here.
I hold the same belief. I don't think what I'm saying means that we cannot be affected by that. We're Africans. That's why I said it's dangerous to even categorize yourself as different. Because the same forces that are influencing developments in these countries are the same forces that we have here. So we cannot be complacent. For former President Mahama's statement, that shouldn't worry us. After all, the current president made a similar statement and it didn't change anything. So I don't take it seriously. But on a more serious note, yes, we should never let our guards down. We have to continuously strengthen our institutions. In so many ways, if you look at Afrobarometer surveys, it's clear that in recent times, Ghanaian support for democracy has fallen from the high 85, close to 90 in the early 2000s to presently around 65% of support. That is an indication that even here, people have serious problems with democracy because perhaps democracy is not delivering the way that we thought it would. So that really challenges our political leaders to find ways to bring confidence back to the democratic process.
This is the point of view. Tonight we're talking Acheampong. This was just an introductory thing which I had to do. Today I'll show you a few things about Acheampong with some nice videos of him giving speeches. We have some nice photos of some of the things he did. It appears he was a very charismatic figure, also very well misunderstood based on what we've read. But first question to you is, why did you write this book? Why a book on Acheampong?
You see, Ben, I've always been disturbed by how we Ghanaians, how our history has been presented to us.
Okay.
You see, think of it. After 60 plus years of independence, we don't even have a consensus on whether one person founded our nation or multiple people.
Or 6 people.
Exactly. You see. And the same thing is happening currently in our recent past. Somebody who was head of state for almost 7 years, for bad or for good, he must have made some interesting, difference in our lives.
Yeah, that's why the 4th longest serving. So there's Rawlings, Nkrumah, Kufuor. So he's the 4th longest serving.
In terms of years.
Years.
Yes.
Because he did 6.5 years.
Almost 7 years. Almost 7 years.
Yeah.
And then also, if you look critically at that period, a lot of interesting developments took place, which I believe you
Oh, yes, we'll get to them.
So I consider that period to be a serious gap, historically speaking, that must be filled. You see, in the forward, my good friend, the Harvard professor, I.K Acheampong, makes an interesting
Any relation, by the way?
No relations at all.
So his Acheampong is AKY.
AKY,
Okay.
and this is ACH. And Emmanuel Acheampong is from Koranza, by the way.
Okay.
So it's nowhere from.
Okay. Just to be clear.
Yes, you know. He makes a point about that, how history is made. And also let me cite Nana Kwanson's mantra on his program, that unless lion finds somebody to write his story,
the hunter will always have
exactly. The history of hunting will always glorify the hunter. In a way, it is so with history. Once you are defeated, you are vanquished. The winner believes that you didn't have anything in your past in order to empower the victor. So it seems like once Acheampong was overthrown and executed, those who succeeded him, who took over, made sure that his name doesn't appear anywhere. And the tragedy with Acheampong, and I put this in my introduction, is that you see, in 1972, he overthrew the Busia government. Okay? And the Busia government, as you know, their tradition has been the high tools for so long. Now they had opportunity to rule, and Acheampong overthrew them. And then, who executed him?
Rawlings.
Rawlings' party is what?
So the PNDC, NDC.
NDC. And now we have NPP, which had the PP as the precursor. And historically, those in the PP, Progress Party of Busia, are those who are currently in the NPP. So Acheampong finds himself, historically speaking, in a very
between a rock and a hard place.
Exactly.
As you said.
Because nobody from the NPP side will have to glorify somebody who cut short their political,
so the NPP side resent him for overthrowing Busia.
Precisely.
And the NDC side cannot openly defend him because Rawlings said he was a bad person.
Exactly, and they killed him.
So, wow.
So unless historians come out, like I've tried to do, to let this and future generations know exactly what happened during that period, Acheampong will never be elevated.
So are you saying there was no book on him before you wrote this?
I did not. There are pieces of articles.
But so there isn't a full book?
I didn't come across a full book. He's been mentioned in many, many writings. Okay?
Wow.
Many writings. Quoted all over the place. His videos are all over the place.
But no book?
No specific book tracing his life from birth to death. This is the only book that I think does that.
Did somebody ask you to do this, or were you just doing it as a question of academic interest? Or
to be honest, a good friend, he's now like my little brother. Tony Acheampong is the son of the general. He came to me 5.5 years ago asking if I will do that. Because I think all these years he's been yearning for how something about the father should be put in the public domain. And once he told the story, I told him, look, this is something I have personally been also reflecting over. Because I've been very curious. Why all these years, the name of Acheampong seems to have been exorcised? Yeah, very curious. Somebody who was there for almost 7 years.
Practically the 70s.
Yes.
You can say the 70s was defined by Acheampong.
Yeah. So my point here is not that he was good or bad. That is a different story we can discuss. But the fact that somebody for 7 years was determining the destiny of this country, that in itself should be of interest of historians and political scientists.
So you are not trying to sanitize him?
If you read the book, you know that there's no sanitization whatsoever. All the bad things I've heard about him are in there. So-called humanizing and Fauto-Beji Golf, they are all in there. But I put them in the proper context for people to understand. Oftentimes, people say things without even knowing the background, the context.
There's a lot of rumor mongering in Ghana, and I noticed that you sort of explained where those feelings came from.
Exactly.
Because quite a number of things we heard as children, you sort of dealt with them.
Yes, all of them.
You didn't run away from anything.
Not at all. Everything that was said about him is in the book. But it gives you a better perspective of what those statements or those so-called rumors came from.
We'll share some highlights when we come back. This is the point of view. Tonight, I'm on Acheampong. And I must say, I have revised my notes about the man. I almost regretted what I believed about him before, because I felt I have been looking at him from a very wrong perspective.
Interesting.
And there was even a teary moment. And I'll tell you how that moment came as I was reading the book. We'll come back and talk more about Acheampong. This is the point of view. My guest is Professor Bafo Agyemang, who's releasing this book in 2 weeks. So we are the first to have it.
That's right.
And you will get it if you stay through the program. We'll be right back. Welcome back to The Point of View. Tonight, my guest, Professor Bafo Agyemang, who is the author of a new book, The General Acheampong, The Life and Times of Ghana's Head of State. And Professor Bafo Agyemang, I think I need to correct a few things. So he was with the UN from 2005 to 2014, and a senior governance advisor for UNDP, Tanzania, and UNIMIL Liberia. And then, of course, co-founder of CDD, which we all know, together with his friend, Professor Jima. And, of course, these days, he also helps as CEO of Kufo Foundation. Let me tell you what people said about the book. Colonel Professor Sabuaji, retired military historian and security analyst, says, the author succeeds in filling a yawning gap in the literature on the military and politics in Ghana and reveals the contradictions and pitfalls in military leadership. David Owusu-Ansah, professor of history, University of Virginia, a riveting narrative and a page-turner on one of Ghana's military heads of state. Well-researched, well-written, historically accurate.
Right.
And this guy is the author of editions of Historical Dictionary of Ghana.
Correct.
Emmanuel Debra, professor of political science, University of Ghana, says it's a balanced perspective, insightful and thorough, thought-provoking. The clarity and originality are quite uncommon. A must-read for students of Ghanaian politics, politicians and soldiers. A few more. Emmanuel Acheampong, the foreword. He says, this book is another important advance in the process of historical recuperation and the healing of a painful Ghanaian past, and a few others. So, let me tell you that this guy seems to be a very charismatic, patriotic guy.
Very much so.
Who loved life and loved Ghana.
Correct.
Is that
That's
a
the
good
picture
summary?
that comes across.
Yeah.
After all the research I did, he came across strongly as a patriot, somebody who loved his country, a nationalist. Because if you look at the kinds of initiatives he undertook in the country, see, people don't even know that it was Acheampong who introduced the national pledge.
And even the anthems, new lyrics.
Yes. He's the one, 1973, introduced it to bring some nationalistic flavor to the anthem. Okay? and many other things that he did. So, patriotism, yes. But of course, again, towards the last 2 years of his stay, there were a lot of problems. That one is also
Let's talk about how he became head of state. I get the impression that there was some sort of preparation, in the sense of, apart from his education and all he did, he was also given positions in running different parts of, I think there was in the Busia government, he had some responsibility. So he did not enter leadership as some sort of total novice.
No. That was during the NLC regime.
Yes.
He was made the Western Regional Commissioner, equivalent of...
like a regional minister.
Regional minister. So perhaps that's where he cut his political teeth.
And then I noticed you were quite strong on emphasizing that his coup was bloodless. Why was that important?
It's important because, again, you know, his end was very bloody. This is a gentleman, if you read him, even as a young person, he hated fights. And there were incidents. These were narrations that we gathered from his hometown. When kids were fighting, he would be the first to step in and say, no, 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 no. So he is very peace-minded. And throughout his life, he never wanted that. There's a story, I don't have to go into the details, even in the Congo, how he was able to...
Yeah, he separated the fight.
Exactly, between the
communities. Actually, they were attacked by 200 people, and he managed to talk them out of violence.
Out of it, you see. And then another important fact we need to say, in 1970, he was sent to Trinidad and Tobago to join a team of Commonwealth judges, military judges, serving on a tribunal to try some soldiers over there who mutinied. At the conclusion of the trial, they had to vote for the death sentence or not. And that required unanimity of votes. Acheampong was the lone member of the panel who said no, and therefore nobody was executed.
But that's interesting, because for a soldier not to like blood and to be seen as a pacifist, that was very...
you see, so people have this misconception about soldiery. You don't go to the military just to kill or to spill blood. You go to protect life and your country. But of course, if something is attacking your country or there's a serious issue, then you are trained to defend and then subdue the attacker. And if in the course of subduing the attacker, there's death, so be it. But the purpose of soldiery is not to go and kill. You have to understand.
One of the impressions I got was that if Acheampong had not led the coup that overthrew Busia, and it was somebody else, possibly from the Volta region, the country would have been thrown into a state of instability. So in a sense, you're saying his being Ashanti and overthrowing a Busia government may have been lucky for Ghana. You didn't directly say that, but I felt you were trying to say something like that.
Yes, I tried to say, and when you read carefully, you get exactly what I was trying to say. Simply put, there were multiple plots against Busia. Multiple. And that was also a period of high ethnic rivalries within the armed forces. You see, now we gloss over it. But the late 60s to the mid 70s, ethnic rivalries were a serious threat to the armed forces itself and to the nation. And Acheampong was a military intelligence person, commanding the Southern Brigade. And initially was expected to even protect Busia because he was recommended to Busia by Afrifa.
It's another interesting story.
Yes, I made all that point in there. But somehow, he was the one to overthrow Busia. And this is a very sore point in the relations between himself and this party that I mentioned. Okay. But I also gathered that most of the coups that were being plotted, as you rightly said, were from that region. And there was this problem that had emerged. One, you know, Busia's policies of laying of
Apollo 587 or something.
587, the civil service, and reshuffling the armed forces and all. All this time, there was ever dominance in these institutions, so they were mostly affected. And that was the cause of their grief with
the Busia government.
Exactly.
And then the Victor Usu versus Agama confrontation over
exactly
over
the
inward-looking issue.
Exactly. So certainly, from that perspective, it's credible to say that there was some clause like that. And what I gathered from a few sources, because that Acheampong did not make very clear, but from a very credible source, he acted to preempt most of these coups because the planners of the other coups were going to be more vicious against one coup. And again, as I say, it's there. It's there. So in that respect, perhaps he did right, in that respect.
And there's also a view that his government was one of the most inclusive in terms of balance.
Correct. And that was not me saying. I quoted a well-known African scholar saying that, in fact, in comparison, his was the most inclusive government in terms of ethnicity.
So I just wanted to give some names. So the 11 members of NRC, this is page 75. You had General I.K Acheampong, Chairman and Head of State, Major N.Y.A. Ashley Larson. That sounds Ga.
Yeah.
Chief of Defense Staff, Colonel Emmanuel Alexander Eskin. This is the Eskin
He
we
just
know.
passed away.
General Eskin.
Yeah, General, yeah.
He was a colonel at the time. He was the Chief of Army Staff. Commodore P.F. Kui,
yes,
who we know as a Presbyterian EP, whatever, but it was an air commodore. Chief of Naval, no, it was a ship, something, naval thing. Chief of Naval Staff.
That's right.
Air Commodore Charles, something called
Busole.
Chief of Air Staff. So
Busole, yeah.
PFK was Navy. And then you have J.H. Kobina, IGP.
Yes, Fanti.
So Kwe is Ebe.
Ebe, yeah.
Major C.D. Benny, I don't know.
From the north.
Member, Major Kwame Ba.
From Bonavo.
Major Anthony Selome.
From Volta.
Major Kwame Agbo.
Agbo, of course, Volta.
And the coup was done by him, Agbo, and Selome. They were the three.
These were the three most.
And then the only civilian in the original NRC, Nathaniel Moore.
Lawyer, the Attorney General.
So you think he was deliberately... He was conscious in choosing...
I believe so. Because you know what? You know, Acheampong's government was the only one that decided that they would place non-indigens in other regions. That's when...
he started that thing?
He did it.
Okay.
No other government has attempted that.
I think Muhammad tried it, where he made a few people... Julius Debra and co-ministers.
Some in fact,
yes.
Even
so he had every regional minister from a different region.
From North was in the eastern region, all over the place.
Actually, you mentioned it here.
Okay.
So you said George Minyela hails from Upper Region, Commissioner of Eastern, Rear Admiral Joy Amedume, who would later be killed, from the Volta region
to the Central region.
Yes, and then Major J. Awuni from the Northern region was, I think, for the Volta.
Awuni, yeah.
Something like that. And then there's L.K. Kojiku from Volta, served as Ashanti.
Yes, Kojiku.
G.E. Osei, Ashanti, posted to Greater Accra. Colonel Victor Kokapia,
yes.
Greater Accra, sent to B.A.
That's right.
E.J. Dawuni, native of Upper Region, went to Western. So Acheampong was like that.
Yes.
What about his links with Nkrumah? Some people felt that, you said there were a couple of things. People thought that his coup was to bring Nkrumah back, and there was speculation that Nkrumah was going to come back.
That's correct. Because, in fact, before the coup, some CPPists, Hansen, Emmanuel Hansen in particular, had made a statement that Nkrumah will be coming back soon because somebody is going to overthrow this government.
Wow.
Okay? And then also, in fact, still people believe that the CPP funded the coup.
I think Obed Al-Samar wrote about that in his book, and you mentioned of that.
But frankly, there was nothing like that. From my own investigation, there was nothing like that. So unlike, say, the Kotoka Afrifa coup that overthrew Nkrumah, where we know that the CIA played a major role and maybe funded the whole process. In the case of Acheampong, you
cannot tell.
No.
But he seemed to admire Nkrumah. His policies mirrored Nkrumah.
Very much so.
And he literally went to beg Sekou Toure to give him Nkrumah's body.
You are jumping the gun. When Nkrumah was sick, dying in Romania, Acheampong sent Dr. Francis Nkrumah,
the firstborn,
yes, to Bucharest.
He paid for his trip there.
everything to bring back Nkrumah.
Wow.
Yes. Then Nkrumah said, unfortunately, his condition was such that the doctors would not allow that to happen. Then he made one request, that if I die, please bury me in my hometown.
Nkrofo.
Okay? Nkrofo. So when he came to Guinea and died, Acheampong took that responsibility seriously. And you know the extent he went to bring Nkrumah's
Which is funny because we're talking about Guinea. Guinea's president wasn't happy with Ghana because he says we have mistreated Nkrumah.
Of course.
So Acheampong had to literally beg. Wow.
Sending Gowon and the Liberian president to plead
that he should give Nkrumah's body
to It took about 3 months, yes.
Before he agreed?
Precisely. Initially, there were certain funny conditions, like his minister, Nkrumah's minister, should be reinstated. The statue that they knocked down should be placed back. All kinds of conditions.
So Secretary really loved Nkrumah?
Of course. Because they were not just good friends, they were true Africanists, Pan-Africanists, I should say. And Nkrumah bailed him out when the French decided to knock on his head with this policy of removing everything from Guinea, because Guinea refused to be linked to France after independence. Nkrumah is the one who rushed and gave, I think it's $10,000. That's what I read, but somebody was reminding me it was maybe 10,000 pounds sterling.
I think so.
I don't know. Whatever it is, was 10,000.
But in terms of, when I look at his policies, was he an Nkrumahist? Was he? What? How do you analyze? Is it a social? What was he? Because what was he?
You see, the guy did not pronounce any ideology. His ideology, if you want, was self-reliance. Self-reliance.
Self-reliance.
He wanted Ghana to be self-reliant. So if you look at all his policies, Operation Feed Yourself, Operation Feed Your Industries, in fact, Kwesi Pratt started this a few days ago. I listened to him. Do you know it was Acheampong who, for the first time, took majority shares in our mines in the country for the nation? 51%. Of course, the consequences perhaps were not the best. But the fact that he was able to take that away from the foreign mining companies was a very courageous move. Because he felt that Ghana should own his own economy. You know his mantra, taking the commanding heights
of the economy. We'll talk about what he did with local entrepreneurs, but there was a point you made about, again, what I like about this book is that you didn't mince words with Busia. And I was quite surprised for somebody who works for Kufuor before. I mean, Busia, you said his relations with other African countries was so bad that Ghana's standing within Africa had gone down. The so-called Aliens Compliance Act brought our respect within the West African sub-region to an all-time low. And it appears Acheampong tried to fix that.
He did. He did. In fact, two things. The Aliens Compliance Order that sent thousands of Nigerians and other West African nation people here back to their homes. And then they're trying to go to have a dialogue with apartheid in South Africa.
That was...
When, in fact, Nkrumah had led this country to get other African countries to boycott South Africa. Busia reversed that. Okay. So when Busia was in government, towards the end of his rule, Ghana's relations with other African countries were very bad. Very, very bad. Especially with Nigeria. Because Nigerians suffered the most. They were the most victims in this Aliens Compliance Order. So to patch up the differences, unfortunately for Acheampong, Gowon was like a mate in school.
I think in the same military school.
Precisely. So they were able to meet, they were able to talk about it, and in fact they instituted what you call Ghana-Nigerian Games.
Oh, so that was under Acheampong, the Ghana-Nigerian Friendly Games.
Friendly Games.
Wow.
The first played here and then in Nigeria, then of course he also...
So he consciously tried to...
He tried to just to rebuild the relations that had been fractured by Busia's policies.
We are still talking about this book. When we come back, we'll talk about some of his policies, Operation Feed Yourself, some of the things he built, and some of their lasting legacies, and then where history will place him. This is still the point of view with Dr. Professor Boafo Agyeman discussing the life and times of General I.K Acheampong. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're still talking Acheampong. We're discussing his life and legacy. This book will be launched on 23rd September.
Yes.
Do we know the venue?
Ghana Academy of Arts
and Sciences. I see. And then it can be found online as well when it's ready?
Yes, amazing and all.
Okay.
When it's ready.
Amazing stuff. Who is this book for? Who can read it?
It's for everybody.
Is it?
Especially the current and future generations, for them to know what had transpired in the past. Very important. Soldiers, politicians, students.
There were two things that we always associate Acheampong with. Operation Feed Yourself and Unigov.
Yeah.
You tackled them in this book.
Yes.
Was Operation Feed Yourself as successful as we are told?
It was successful, certainly, to some large extent. Because it marked the very first time in our country where we became self-sufficient in rice production and even exported rice to
self-sufficient in rice.
Rice and exported rice.
Wow, two consecutive years.
Yes, and I got it from the statistical services.
Wow.
Okay, that time Burkina was called Upper Volta. We were shipping rice there
for two consecutive years.
I'm telling you, 1974, 5, and 6.
Wow.
So we've done it before. During the Operation Feed Yourself era, do you know that here in Accra, Bemakam Airport Residential, people were farming behind their houses. Everybody was farming.
So it worked for at least 2 years?
It worked.
But Yentua didn't work?
Well, Yentua worked in the sense that the Western creditors tried to punish. But in fact, they even did not, because they realized that they needed to handle it carefully. Otherwise, there will be what we call the contagion effect. That is to say, other debtor nations taking cue from what Acheampong had done. And I got that stuff from one researcher called Robinson. I've quoted him.
So OFY worked.
It worked.
Self-dependence worked. To an extent, then he also, you listed a whole lot of local entrepreneurs that he supported. Edward Osei, Boachi Mattress. You had a name called Joseph Kwabene Sian.
Tata Brewery. Do you know that brewery?
Tata Brewery. It became ABC, Achimota Brewery later. After it was.
Yeah.
Then there was somebody called Samuel Christian Apenting.
Apenting Salts Industries. The Salts Industries.
Then he did Mark Kofi.
BMW and cars Mazda that he was assembling.
And then there was something called Kous Motors.
Kous, as a Kofi.
And then
they were assembling the Golf vehicles.
So
by the way, but you see, so Ben, you realize that what you're having now with the Volkswagen being assembled, it's not the first time. You've done
so he did with Kous. And then there was also the New Plan
bus, exactly. He introduced it, assembled in Kumasi, and then here in Accra towards the Achimota. They were assembled here.
So this idea of commanding heights, he actually meant it.
He meant it.
So what went wrong? If OFY worked, Ghanaian entrepreneurs were being given support, people were growing corn and stuff, people liked him for the first period of, I think from 72 to 76. What went wrong? What happened to him?
What went wrong was that after 75 towards 76, the economy started nosediving. For all kinds of reasons. The international environment, economically, was downward. You know, the Yom Kippur War of 1973, OPEC was formed, and from maybe a few pennies, oil became such a big thing. And by the way, throughout the period, for instance, Acheampong refused to pass on the increases to consumers.
So he was subsidizing petrol?
He was subsidizing it.
Which was affecting the fiscal space?
Precisely. You see. So then, of course, I guess in politics, in leadership, it comes to a point where your own people, for all kinds of reasons, will begin to rebel against you. So within the armed forces, the issue of corruption loomed large. And it's true that he wasn't successful in controlling his officers. He wasn't successful. There was one incident that I cited where he sacked this colonel who went to Norway to make some deals for cement and came back. Acheampong fired him. That incident I have is factual. But overall, I think he was very soft on those who were corrupt. And that really undid him. Then also, you find out that Acheampong was such a kind-hearted person. You could not go to him to ask for something that he would not give you.
Was he giving golf to women?
That is the claim. But the fact
did you investigate it?
But yes, I did.
What did you find?
What I found is that he empowered women financially through loans, not his loan, but getting them access to loans, because he believed strongly, for some interesting reason, maybe he got it from his mother or his family side, that women were better entrepreneurs than men. So most of the trades that the traders needed, women were getting them. If you came to Makola at the time before the downturn, women were dominant in that sector. And so they made money and bought their vehicles. So it was, I mean, do you think that it's possible for any one man to buy hundreds of gold for hundreds of women? Is it possible?
But when he was asked, there's something you wrote which I thought was quite interesting. During the trial, I don't know why it's called a trial or some, he was asked about girlfriends.
During the trial.
And he said, yeah, but which of them doesn't have a girlfriend?
Oh yeah, you can quote.
I thought that was serious. That he could actually say in front of the cameras.
Well,
that
he's an honest man.
Yeah, so he admitted that he liked women.
He said, who doesn't like women? And as the...
Where is this thing? I'm looking for it.
As the panel, who here flirts with his wife alone. But that was being honest.
It is not true, page 194. It is not true that I bought golf carts for my numerous girlfriends. I do not deny that I had girlfriends. All of us have girlfriends. Even you. Which of you flirt with your wife only? We all do it. And to me, I do not see how girlfriends contributed to the ruin of Ghana's economy. No one can claim to be a paragon of virtue. We all do it.
Exactly. What? Don't you like that? Being so straightforward and honest?
That was quite interesting.
Exactly.
But his end was tragic, the way he was killed, because apparently there were coup attempts on him.
Yes.
And against judgment, he decided not to execute anybody.
None of them.
Yet he was killed in a very brutal way.
Yeah, that's what you may call there's a literary term for that. His end was very tragic. So if you look at his life story, what he did for the country and all, that end, I guess, was undeserving.
That's your conclusion?
Tragic hero.
He didn't deserve
Tragic
to end the way he ended?
Not at all. He didn't deserve, because first of all, the accusations of corruption that were hugely placed on him, nothing, no evidence, was even his bank account showed ordinary savings. He didn't have a bank account in any foreign country.
He didn't have apparently he had only one house in his hometown.
One house in his hometown.
He didn't even build a house in Accra.
No. Yet, Dansoman Estate, he was the one who introduced it. It was the largest public estate
and
in
he didn't even
Africa.
have any of the Dansoman houses?
No. Tashinungwa
He did
estate.
Tashinungwa estate.
He did it. He didn't take one for himself.
Wow.
And these are facts.
So he didn't own a house apart from his house in Fidium?
You remember in the book, I tell an interesting story, which was told me by a very close associate of his. When they were going to build houses, the reason why he provided housing for the soldiers was that he said, look, where I live in Arakan Barracks, perhaps this is the only house I have. And if I leave the army, I might find myself on the street myself.
Wow.
Okay? He did it. So those, I'm sure some of our listeners who are glued to the old archaic story of he was corrupt and all, they may have their say, but the evidence does not support it. You know, I note in the book, when he was overthrown, his wife, for instance, Faustina, went to England to live. For almost 15 years, he lived in public housing.
Council flat?
Yeah, council flat.
So there was nothing?
Nothing.
So in many ways, it was like Nkrumah then. They didn't really care about personal wealth.
Precisely. That's what I've discovered.
Wow.
Nothing. And anybody who has contrary evidence should bring it forward.
That's an incredible angle, and I found that quite intriguing. Yet, he wasn't given a proper trial, was he?
How can it be a proper trial? Kangaroo is even a kind word to use.
He didn't have counsel. There was no lawyer.
They determined to kill them, and they did.
So within 3 days, they brought him from his hometown. He didn't. Wow.
Yeah.
3 days.
3 days from his hometown, he came to Accra.
And you recount the story of at the time, the young man who drove him was his protege.
Yeah, Captain Kumsin. His
Budu
picture,
Kumsin.
He has a picture in the book with the Acheampong. Budu Kumsin. He was like his son in the military because apparently Kumsin's father was a chaplain, Methodist chaplain in the army when Acheampong was like a captain or major. So he knew that man. So when this young man enrolled in the army, Acheampong discovered him and took him as a son. So he was the one serving Acheampong all the time. And he was the guy that the AFRC chose to bring him to be killed.
Together with Utuka?
Utuka, indeed, yeah.
His wife, though, I mean, what I found so sad was when his body was exhumed and reburied, and they presented the ring to her, she was just in tears. Yeah. How is she?
She's fine.
What does she feel about all this?
I think she has overcome the trauma. But of course, every now and then, when you lose your husband in such a fashion, you can never forget completely. So I'm sure. But he's fine.
Is the state taking care of her?
I do not know the facts about that. But I think recently there was some hula baloo over first ladies. And it came out that, in fact, they started paying the wives of all the former military heads of states. So I presume that he was one of them. Yeah.
But are they happy with you for doing this?
Very, very happy. I told you, Tony has been working very closely with me, and I have to credit him for some of the information that I got. He pointed me to the right places, to the right people, and there were some few notes. You know, when he was overthrown, his office was ransacked, his house was ransacked, so most of his personal notes were lost. But I think the few that were left in his hometown, Tony was able to give me access to those very personal information for me to get the picture to present in the book.
Well done. Where will we get, what bookshop will it be in, do you know?
Once it's out, it will be at the university's bookshop, Kingdom Bookstore, and the others. It will be announced once it's, I mean, the marketers are working on that.
I mean, this was good. I loved it. Thank you for talking to us.
My pleasure.
I hope you are keeping well. You are staying safe. Yes. COVID-19 and this.
Oh, yeah. I'm good.
Amazing. It's good to see you. Thank you for coming.
It's my pleasure.
Wow. Get this book and read it. You will love it. I mean, Acheampong, amazing guy, honestly. I wish I had met him. I mean, he died before I was born. That was the only problem. But we thank God for historians who can help us to appreciate these things. So get the book and read it and learn something new. This is The Point of View. My name is Ben Adable. My guest has been Professor Bafo Agyeman-Duah, and he's launching the book on the 23rd. Coming up next is the Business Dashboard. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
The Point of View is brought to you by Cowbell Coffee. Cowbell Coffee. Taste it, love it. Kel Charcoal Toothpaste. Kel Charcoal. Happy smile. Enterprise Life. Enterprise. Your advantage.